This is a simple looking quantitative comparison question involving square roots or quadratic surds, and this is a question type that's pretty common in standardized tests like the GRE, for example. So we have two quantities. The quantity A, we have some square roots there, and these numbers that we have with the square roots are not perfect squares, like 56, 48, 42. These are not perfect squares, right? So it's not immediately apparent what value quantity A can take. On the other hand, in quantity B, we are given an integer 8, which is of course a very simple and well understood value. So the question is, how do we approach these problems? And of course, we can guess one way or the other. We have 4 choices. One answer is correct or would be correct, right? But the whole mission with this kind of videos or educational videos is to take the guesswork out and try to arrive at objective mathematical solutions to this problem. So in problems like these, where the relationship is often not apparent at the beginning, we basically write out the two quantities, and then we basically have a question mark in between. So the question mark basically is a placeholder for what the relationship of those quantities could be. It could be a greater than sign, it could be a lesser than sign, right? Or it could be an equality sign. So we don't know what it is in this case, right? So what do we do from here? Well, it's actually pretty simple. So we can just treat this like some equation or an inequality, right? And we can basically do all the stuff that we usually do while solving a given equation or a given inequality. The only thing that we need to be mindful here is, if at all we are multiplying both sides by negative numbers, then if it's an inequality, the inequality will basically change sign. Whereas if it's an equation or an equality, then the equality will be preserved no matter what, right? And then we can't multiply or divide by 0, because that's just avoided. So in this case, keeping those rules in mind, what we can simply do is we'll just treat this like a regular equation or an inequality, and we'll bring one of those values to the other side. In this case, root 42. So let's bring root 42 over to the right hand side, and when we do that, it will change signs. It will become 8 plus root 42, right? We still keep the question mark because the relationship between the two quantities is still not apparent, right? What we have. So we have on the one hand root 56 plus root 48 now, and on the other hand we have 8 plus root 42. And since I have not multiplied or divided by a negative number, right, so I know that whatever inequality or whatever it was, if it's an inequality, it's still preserved, right? So I do not worry about changing the inequality to something else. So from here on, what do I do? So I have basically square roots, and there are certain ways of getting rid of the square root signs. And one way is, and this I probably have applied in one of my earlier videos involving square roots, is basically multiply by its conjugate and get some kind of commonality between the two expressions that we're evaluating. But in this case, it doesn't appear, because the conjugate approach doesn't appear very, amenable, because, it doesn't seem to be helping us that much, right? Just from a look of it. Because if I, multiply, divide both sides by conjugate, I'll basically get an integer up above, but things are going to change, and in the denominator I'll have root over 56 minus root over 48 on one side, and on the other side I'll still have 8 minus root 42. And basically, if we do the conjugate approach, it doesn't really help you out that much, because you still have to still have leftover square roots to deal with and to compare with. So it doesn't help that way. The other thing, which is the second approach, which we'll try now, is basically getting rid of at least some of those square roots by squaring the expression. And in this case, since we're dealing the quantities on both the sides of that question mark, right, they are positive quantities, right? Because root 56 plus root 48, it's a positive quantity, and 8 plus root 42, that's a positive quantity as well. So if I square, that relationship will still be preserved. So I do not worry about changing a potential inequality by the act of squaring. So if I square, the left hand side becomes this one, the right hand side becomes basically whole square, and now I'll just apply a plus b whole square is equal to a square plus b square plus 2ab. And if I do that to the right side, or rather to the left side first, that becomes 56 plus 48 plus 2, and under the root I have 56 multiplied by 48. So still I have square roots, so we have to see what we can do about that. But let's just expand out the right hand side as well, and we have 64 plus 42 plus 2 multiplied by 8 multiplied by root 42. So 64 is basically, it comes from 8 square, right? So this is very simple till this stage. Now we still have got to do with the square roots that are still remaining even after squaring. So let's see if we can simplify those any further. So we'll start with the square root we have on the left hand side, which is 56 multiplied by 48. So square root of 56 multiplied by 48. And 56 we can break it up as 8 multiplied by 7, and 48 we can break it up as 6 multiplied by 8, right? And then this becomes 8 square multiplied by 42. And we can take 8 out. So 8 square, if I take under root 8 square out, that becomes just 8. So I have basically 8 root 42. So now I can go back to the left hand side, and that becomes, so 56 plus 48, that adds up to 104. I have that square root now becomes 2 multiplied by 8 root 42. And on the right hand side I add up 64 and 42, so that comes to 106, and then I'm left with 16 root over 42. So I have root over 42 on both sides, and I actually have the same. So if you inspect these, you have the same quantity, 16 root over 42 on either side, right? So now, as I write these expressions on both sides, this becomes much easier to compare, because my square root, I still have a imperfect number there, imperfect square, like root over 42, right? But I need not worry about that, because on both sides of that question mark I have that quantity. So it's the same quantity, 16 multiplied by root 42. But on one hand, on the left hand side I have 104, and on the right hand side I have 106. So now it's the relationship between these two is actually pretty clear. So I have basically solved what that question mark is. It's basically less than, right? So the sign that will apply here is 104 plus 16 root 42 less than 106 plus 16 multiplied by root 42. So now if I trace back all the way up from where I started, right? So my placeholder, the question mark that I placed, that simply becomes a lesser than sign, right? And what this implies basically is quantity B is greater. So the correct choice for this particular question would be B, option B, quantity B is greater.